Hey miners, Mining King here. This video is going to be probably the first video in a new series I create called Mining 101. And this is going to be a great video for all new miners and maybe even some of you, maybe, I want to say advanced, but I would say who've been in the space, who've mined a little bit. This could be extremely informative for you guys. So if you're not familiar, I will leave, I used to have a rig right here, and this was on 120 volt. So I used to have a rig up here. I will leave a link in the card up here if you want to check that out when I used to mine in my house. When you're doing in-home mining, you need to be extremely careful about how much wattage you're pulling. I wanted to do this video, and we're gonna go outside and take a look at the circuit breaker panel and stuff like that. But if you're here in the US and you're using, and let's say you're a small home miner, you kind of need to be a little bit of an electrician, a tiny bit, to get by, because you need to be safe with your power. You don't want to cause a fire. You don't want to short anything out. You don't want melted cables or anything like that. You really need to watch what you're doing. So we're going to walk out and we're going to go look at my breaker panel out here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it with you guys. Okay guys, we're out here at my circuit panel, and then you guys can see all my breakers right here, and I'll try to get real close up and out of the sun. So when you're looking at your panel here, you need to find out which room that you're going to be in. So this is where I had it in my guest room here. This is bedroom number 4. And this is a CAA CFI breaker. They're very sensitive. So I recommend, if possible, staying away from CFI breakers because these do trip. And that is, I think that's because they have low temperature ratings here on these breakers. So that's why this was tripping every now and then, and I was having some issues. When you come over here, you're going to see these numbers here, right? I'll try to get close on this so you guys can see them. But see, this says 15, 20. This is my garage. This is my 240 volt, 30 amp circuit. So you need to pay attention to these numbers right here, okay? Because this is how many amps that you can have on the circuit. And you also need to figure out what else is on the circuit. So what you need to do is when you are mining, you actually should, what I recommend doing, and don't have anything on, make sure everything's off on this circuit, or at least what you think's off. Make sure nothing like computers or anything are on, and you need to actually turn this circuit, like let's say we're going to do this bedroom number 4, we need to turn this breaker off, okay? And we're going to go back inside. I'm going to show you a little bit more of what you need to look out for. All right guys, so we're in the house now. I already know from experience what's going to be on this particular breaker because I've dealt with it before. So we'll come back out here, we'll come back here to the bedroom, right? So on this circuit was this bedroom, as well as this ceiling fan and this light and all that stuff. And I ended up, I would recommend getting like a phone charger, or you could get one of the plug-in testers, because I found that this outlet is also on that circuit, as well as inside of our pantry here. So this light would also control the be on that breaker, as well as these lights and this plug and this plug. So that was all on the same breaker. So something you're going to need to account for is if anything is ever plugged into these at any point in time. What we need to do is you guys need to consider if you have a guest over, or somebody turns on a light, somebody turns on a fan, somebody has something plugged in somewhere. You need to account for every single one of those things on that circuit. So the math to figure out how many watts you can have on a particular circuit is going to be this. You take 120 volts, because that's what's coming from that outlet, times it by the amps, which is 15 amps, which gives you a total of 1800 watts. But you can only use 80%. So 20% of 1800 is 360. So you're looking at about 1,444 watts total usable energy at once. But like I said, you need to account for fans and lights and everything else on that circuit. So make sure to leave yourself plenty of room, or you'll be like me where I had to bring a smaller rig in here because the breaker kept tripping when things were getting turned on, like the light and stuff. The breaker would go off. So you guys really need to pay attention. Make sure you do your math correctly. Make sure you guys understand your wattage. So like I said, volts times amps equal wattage. So we're also going to go talk about some power cables as well as some PCI-E cables. Okay guys, so I just kind of like came out here in the garage just to kind of show you guys some stuff here. So first thing we're going to look at, splitters are extremely important because this is how we get, you know, more connections on our rigs. But you need to pay attention to this thickness of this wire. It'll be measured in a gauge, which is usually AWG. So you need to pay attention to what gauge this particular wire is. I try to get 18 gauge. I've seen these as low as 22 gauge. Don't use 22 or 20s, get 18s. You want these feel really thick, really solid. You want good quality cables. The first thing that's going to happen if you don't have quality cables, over time as you mine, they will heat up and melt, and that will cause a fire. So I know it's tempting to cheap out, but when it comes to your electrical components that deliver power, never cheap out. So I wanted to go over these two. These are two regular 120 volt power plugs for regular ATX power supplies. Now, you can definitely tell, I'll put them side by side on the camera. Okay. So you can tell that the one to my left is extremely thicker. So once again, when you need to pay attention to the gauge that you're going to be using for your power supplies. This one is from a 1000 watt EVGA, so it's extremely thick. This one is much lighter. It's not as big. This one's from a 600 watt power supply. This is a spare one I had sitting in my room, but this is not as thick as this cable. So when you're thinking about if you have to buy some C14s to C13s to C14s or C19s to C20s, you want, if you're going to be pushing power, so this is a 2000 watt Dell server power supply. This cable is extremely thick. So these are the cables that so besides that one server power supply right there on my 1660 Super rig, the rest of them use C13 to C14, and these are all 15 amp 240 volt cables. So just to give like a little example of how many watts can this particular cable handle. So we're going to use the volts, amps will equal wattage, which means you times the volts by the amps, and that will give you your wattage. So if we look closely here, this says it can handle between 100 to 250 volts at 15 amps. So maximum is 250 volt by 15 amps. So that's 3,750 watts that this cable can handle. But that's the maximum amount of power. So we only would want to use 80% at a continuous time. So that's roughly about, that's going to be 750 watts off of the 3750. So this thing can handle continuous power of 3,000 watts. So when you're looking at cables, power cables to power like server power supplies or maybe you're looking for other cables to power your ATX power supplies, you need a replacement, whatever. Just remember, hey, look at this. How many volts and how many amps can it have? So you take your volts times your amps, and that will give you your wattage. And then remember, you only want to use 80%. So if your rig needs more than 80%, you need to get a thicker gauge cable. Alright guys, I also wanted to go over these. These are some old time, these are pretty old. These are 3 caps, but you can still find these. These are still being sold. So you guys need to be careful, okay? Now there is 3 different power connectors here. Right here, there is a PCI-E 6-pin here. And then right here you have a SATA, and then you have a Molex, okay? The SATA, first off, can only handle about 50 watts. Once you start pulling more than that, which some cards will, especially if you're doing higher powered cards, it will start to get hot and it will melt. Okay. Now Molex is a super unstable connection. It can handle let me go see the folks. It can handle the wattage, but it's pretty unstable, and it also depends on the connecting pins where this connects into, like what grade they are. If a company cheaps out and uses cheap pins, you're gonna have a fire. The safest and best way to always power a riser is always through the 6-pin right here where my finger is. You always want to power it with the 6-pin. So just keep that in mind. This is a great way to use splitters. You use splitters on these because these will never use the full amount of power that a splitter can handle. So I always put splitters on my risers to, try to, not have as many cables. So I just wanted to go over some safety things with you guys. So if you guys are new to mining, what's safe, to use. So just kind of keep that in mind. While we're in here and we're looking at our rigs, right? Some of these rigs are in frames because I'm testing for thermals, right? So some have fans, some don't have any fans, like these ones here. These ones are just hanging. So when you're calculating your total wattage, you need to take in consideration not just the GPUs that's being reported in the software, but you also need to take account your motherboard, your CPU, your fans, everything. So you need to really also have a watt meter of some sort. I'll leave a link for an Amazon one that you could buy, as well as I may be having my buddy maybe make a batch for me, and then we might sell them, maybe. So something kind of like the meter box. So stay tuned for that. But when you are going to mine, you do want to have the power meter is not just to show you profitability and how much money you're burning. It's also so you can safely measure the rig, so that way you know how much power it's using. It's a great tool. I recommend everybody gets a power meter. It's extremely effective and they're not very expensive. So I hope this was a great video for some of you new miners. This is some things that you guys really need to be considering when you guys are going to start building your mining rigs. Even just one in your house. If you put a 1660 super rig on here, this rig right here burns about 1200 watts or so. I think so right now in Hive it says it's about 11 or 1050, but it's probably right around, I'm going to say 1150, 1200, right? To power all the risers and to power all the GPUs and all that other stuff. So just think about that. That one rig you can only put in one room with nothing else on it. So if you had like a freezer and a TV and a bunch of lights, you're probably going to be tripping your breaker. So you guys, when you're building these things, figure out your electrical first, then plan your rig. Electrical first, and then you plan your rigs. So, alright guys, this is the Mining King giving you the most hashes, and I'll see you next time.